point here is it a proposition that is delivering, a good perceived value and actually a good real value, tangible value? And I think the case with Amazon, I think that's true. I think, in other sectors, perhaps where the proposition is narrower, as in it's free delivery, what else can it be? What other value? Am I getting, access to, previews of product? Am I getting, access to benefits that perhaps not everybody gets? And I think you need to build that proposition out from just a single point of benefit.
Yeah, I think the subscription model makes sense in certain instances. In the US, about a year ago, unlimited movie subscription, was launched, and then about 3 weeks ago they cut it back to 6 movies a month. Last week, a ride-sharing service in the United States said for $300 a month, you can have unlimited, shuttle rides, around your area. I don't know if they're going to allow someone to drive from Chicago to Nebraska, but I think people will self-select themselves to participate in the subscription. And so if I'm a heavy user, I'm going to pay the subscription and benefit.
Well, I think it's a far bigger thing than that. I think that there's 3 big levers, there's 3 big variables going on here in a subscription, in any service. There's utility, is it useful? There's then entertainment, is it entertaining? And then there's transactions. And I think the loyalty market in particular has failed by being obsessed with the transaction. We talk about a subscription service, subscriptions and transactions. Whereas actually, in order to win the game here, you have to have utility first. Reason why people use Netflix is it's a good service, and it learns what I want. I've been on Netflix for a while now. I go in there and I've got things that I want to watch. But if I go on my daughter's Netflix, I think it's rubbish service because I just think, why would I watch any of this rubbish? Whereas I think, and if you take apps for example, I can name some loyalty apps that are so obsessed with transactions and driving transactions, they forget that an app, you're in the entertainment service. You're in the entertainment business on an app, not the transaction service. And if you take 2 apps, for example, say the Virgin Red app compared to say the Nectar app, is the one has they're both trying to do the same thing, but one's entertainment in the entertainment business and one's in the transaction business, and one has far more transactions per customer than the other, and it's perhaps not the one with the biggest volume behind it.
So how important is the experience, the entertainment, the gamification? Do you have banks that do gamification and entertainment, or is it seriously down to payment?
I guess in terms of what are they looking to achieve from a customer perspective, I think they are looking to deliver solutions that are more engaging to customers. So it's not just seen as a transactional relationship. That's not necessarily easy to do, and I think there are some banks that probably operate in that space more comfortably than others. And I think it's why the rise of the challenger banks has been so successful, because they've brought a different user experience, a different, shall I say, caring nature to the way they interact with their customers. And I think banks are therefore playing catch up. I think loyalty within that has a role to play. To add more value back to that relationship, but it's probably not a natural setting. We don't go to our bank apps to be entertained generally.
No,
Shame.
It might actually detract from it in the banking exit.
Exactly.
Loyalty tends to have sort of emotional appeal or transactional functional appeal. And Visa would naturally be more on the transactional functional side, but I think just the ability to make the transactions more seamless allows the opportunity to introduce more emotional appeal. And because you have the opportunity to know where a customer is and with which merchant, at specific points in time, there's the opportunity for surprise and delight. Just in the last year, I've been surprised by 3 or 4 brands that have recognized me at a specific moment and treated me with respect and appreciation, and I was like blown away by that. So, I remember that. In fact, I'm sharing that story with you again today. So I think there's the opportunity on both the emotional side and the transactional side. And brands need to be thinking about both.
Just generally, acknowledgement, is key,
exactly.
isn't it? Now, whether that's mail or digital, I think is probably less key. It is the fact, how many brands are out there consciously acknowledging when a customer's maybe made a purchase, maybe made a certain type of purchase, maybe hasn't purchased with them for so long. I think having that within your ECRM journeys, ensuring that you're reflecting the status of a customer's relationship with you, is really important. And I think, you kind of leave that out at your peril, really.
Do you think good old-fashioned service is going to make a comeback, like good old-fashioned direct marketing will make a comeback, and the concierge service where you talk to a real person who is going to deal with your problem themselves? Do you think this will become, what you pay for, you pay extra and part of loyalty?
To have a team that is ready and waiting to deal with people in person has a cost, and I think that's the trade-off that businesses will need to make. But for me, digital solutions that work, does become far more scalable, and I think generally speaking, certainly the feedback I've seen, customers are receptive to it. But as a big caveat, it has to work.
I would argue that Amazon, arguably a pretty digital company, is built on good old-fashioned service. It's just automated and augmented with a bunch of technology.
But the parcel gets delivered, doesn't it?
The service is excellent.
Well,
People expect good service, and they consistently get good service, and that has allowed them to grow in spite of the fact that they're not the lowest cost supplier in the market. It's just the consistency of service.
Yeah. And this is what I think, bring it to the loyalty again, is I think it was Tim Mason at Clubcard who described loyalty programs as being the sprinkles on the top of the coffee, meaning that the coffee still has to be hot, still has to be tasty, it still has to be delivered in the right atmosphere. It's just the bit on the top. And so your service has to be right. But where I think loyalty struggled, and especially recently, is in an industry, in a market where marketing directors particularly are obsessed with NPS scores, is measuring NPS scores through the whole customer journey. And yet I've seen so often that the loyalty program has a lower NPS score than often the main brand. And I think this is the point which you have to say, guys, why have you had a loyalty program where people are dissatisfied with?
Yeah, in fact, I was in a conversation with a train operating company yesterday, and for the last 4 or 5 years, they've treated their loyalty program as a separate part of marketing. And we were trying to make the argument that loyalty needs to be embedded in all of your customer touch points in marketing.
Yeah.
And if you do that, the loyalty program will generate a much higher return on investment than all of your other channels of customer acquisition and retention. But if you treat it like a stepchild, then it's just going to be a cost center.
That's right. I think, to Ian's point earlier, a lot of the programs today do focus very much on that transaction piece. Now, that might be a purchase, it might be a redemption, but there's a lot of other things you can do as a customer to interact with a brand, with a program. Now that may be visiting a store, that may be making a complaint, it may be asking a question. Now, how many of those touch points are recorded and maintained, on a customer's profile? The answer from experience is certainly not always. So you may look at a customer who's maybe not transacted with you recently, but they may have engaged with you in other ways. Now, if you don't know that, you can't act upon it. And I think, for me, being able to capitalise on overall and grow overall customer engagement is really where people.
And this is going back to my point about GDPR. If you don't do it, someone else will, because of the data that you can now get on data portability. Is I can get everything of every touch point and the amount of companies I've worked in where I can't even get that within the company. And yet I can now get it as a customer. And not only can I get it as a customer, I can pass it on to a trusted third party if I want to. And so if you don't use it and maximise it, someone else will.
And also, customers are using their own data, aren't they? American Airlines were telling me that their social media team actually sit on the same desk as the operations team, because the social media team know when there's a problem before the operations team know. Unfortunately, the media know at the same time too, because they all use the same software. So, once the social media team say, we've got a problem, then everyone jumps to solve that problem, and it's working.
Absolutely.
So
that's
well
right.
done,
But it's
customers.
all of these touch points with the customer that build loyalty. I mean, we've been talking a little bit about points this morning. I personally don't think giving customers points builds much loyalty at all. At best, it creates lock-in. But it's an excuse to start a dialogue. But a customer's loyalty to a brand comes from their cumulative experience with the brand across many different touch points, and not just the purchase touch point, as well as their perception of value. And that doesn't mean it has to be the lowest price, it's the overall perceived value that they get from that supplier. And that's really what builds loyalty over time and an affinity for a brand.